Minister, we have questioners waiting from the media to grill you, but I might start, if I may. I know you alluded to the fact that your National Party colleagues have some concern about the effect of this on the regions and local content. They probably have been through this many times before, and aggregation held great promise for them, and they saw over time that what started well ended badly. So is there any way really that you can ensure over time that local content is protected?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. It's entirely understandable that people who live in regional areas and regional members of parliament get a bit edgy, a bit nervous when you talk about media reform. They fear that local newsrooms will close. They fear that businesses will seek to do what they can to improve their bottom line. I guess that the good news is that a lot of regional TV operations who are represented here today recognise that providing good local news services is actually good business. So there are many media organisations who provide far in excess of their licence requirements when it comes to local news content. So that's the first point. The second point is that numbers of regional TV operators say that if they can get scale, if they can configure themselves in ways that best suit them, then they'll be in a better position to provide local content. So we're happy to take them at their word, and that's why we're introducing a new higher baseline for local content.
Okay, our next question is from the Adelaide Advertiser.
Hi. Jackson Goth-Snape from the Adelaide Advertiser. Minister, thank you for the address. The analogy you used, sinews and soul, was particularly vivid. I'd like to start with a question about the soul. Do you consider yourself an advocate for the arts, and can we therefore judge an advocate for the arts on how much funding that advocate can secure? And on the sinew, if a company like Telstra ultimately buys the NBN in a number of years, how will history judge this project, particularly given your government will have by then had a very good opportunity to correct Labor's so-called wrongs?
Thank you. Well, yes, I do consider myself to be a strong advocate for the arts. The arts isn't something that should be seen as a luxury. The arts isn't something that should be seen as an extra. The arts are core to who we are as a nation. They're core to how we express ourselves, how we interpret our past, how we look to the future. So the arts are core business for government. But it's not just something for government. Yes, it's appropriate that government provides funding to support the arts across the genres. But it's also important that that government money is used to leverage philanthropic, corporate and individual dollars into the sector. So I don't think an arts minister or a government should be judged just on the quantum of money that government puts in, but we do put significant dollars into support for the arts. In relation to NBN, you're right. We inherited something that was extremely fraught. Something of the order of only 15% of the previous government's rollout targets had been met. They spent about $6 billion, reaching 2% of the population. We've taken a different approach, a technology-agnostic approach, to use the mode that gets the NBN rolled out fastest and at lowest cost, and the aim is to have that rolled out by 2020. You raise issues of ownership. Those matters can only be addressed once there's certain legislative processes that have gone through. What my focus on isn't what ownership arrangements might be in the future. My focus is on getting the NBN rolled out as quickly as we possibly can and at lowest cost. And why that's important is because some of the transforming economic effects of the NBN can only be realised if everyone has it. It's not going to be terribly transformative if only a relatively small number of people have it. So that's why the focus is getting it rolled out as soon as possible.
West Australian.
Thanks for your speech, Minister. Andrew Tillett from the West Australian. Can I ask you about anti-siphoning? It's the part of the media reform package that was left off. You've said that it's something that might be revisited when there's a sort of parliamentary support and greater community understanding. Do you intend to revisit it in a second term of a Turnbull government if you're re-elected, whenever the election is held? And with it, what sports would you like to see come off the list? Do you have a personal opinion about that? And I'm sure you'll keep Hawthorn games on it. And can you tell me too, I mean, it seems as a sports fan we have got a pretty good balance there already. We don't want to end up with an English situation where you can't watch Premier League soccer or the Ashes, for instance, because that's been snapped up by pay TV.
Sure. No, thank you. I guess firstly, there are a number of misconceptions about the anti-siphoning list. There's probably a general view that the anti-siphoning list almost mandates that free-to-airs must acquire particular events. It doesn't. There's probably a view abroad that if free-to-airs purchase particular events, that they're mandated to screen them. They're not. There's probably also not an appreciation of the fact that there's nothing to stop the free-to-airs from purchasing events and then just on selling them to subscription TV. So, recognising that, I do acknowledge that the anti-siphoning list does provide a degree of comfort to the community that the events they love will be available free-to-air. To some extent, for some of the sports, it's a bit of an academic exercise at the moment because I think NRL and ARL are locked up until the early 2020s. The approach I take to media law in the broad is that it's under constant review. I think that's got to be true of all media law. But I've made the point before that I don't think there's a particularly good community understanding of the anti-siphoning list at the moment. I think for there to be significant change, there would need to be a better appreciation of what it does do and what it doesn't do. And there would also need to be broad parliamentary support for change. And I don't think those circumstances are presently there.
You don't want to roll yourself on the hand grenade of nominating sports that should go on?
Well, I'll just say each to their own.
Okay. Radio 2CC.
Minister, Tim Shaw from 2CC Canberra. I note your remarks regarding strong and viable media organisations, very, very important, and also you're proprietor agnostic. Can I just take you through some figures here? Foxtel has a 15% stake in 10 News. Last year acquired 15% in APN, and there's talk of News Corp buying Sky News. Now, one happy billionaire, referring to angry billionaires before, is heading back from his honeymoon today. Are you personally comfortable with the steady expansion of the Murdoch family interests in the Australian media, and particularly in the traditional Australian media, arguably a level of dominance not seen in any other Western democracy? I'd like your personal view on that. Secondly, your colleague Ewan Jones, in an arts ministry question, celebrated Australian music up at the Parliamentary Friends, and I believe you were in a cabinet meeting, so you're pretty busy. But Jimmy Barnes from Cold Chisel made this remark. He said that musicians struggle for most of their careers. In fact, it's a $15 billion Australian music industry, but, you know, more than the bulk of those songwriters are earning less than $10,000 a year. Do you support Ewan Jones's call for arts and music, or music, to be moved into the small business portfolio and the innovations portfolio to be able to help them develop their business? Arts is big business. Your comments on that as well?
Sure. Thank you. Well, when it comes to particular families who have been engaged in the media industry, whether they be the Murdochs or the Packers in times gone by, or the Stokes, I think they've been forces for good. I think they've run good organisations. When it comes to the particular configurations of media organisations in the country, as I say, I'm fairly agnostic. But we do, even after getting rid of Reach, even after getting rid of 2 out of 3, we still do have a number of protections. As I said, we've got the 2 to a market rule in relation to radio, we've got the 1 to a market rule in relation to TV, and we've got the 5-4 voices rule, 5 voices for metro areas, for regional areas. In addition to that, there are still the protections of the ACCC. So I'm fairly relaxed, I guess is the point. When it comes to Australian music, I'd love to keep it in my portfolio. I was very annoyed last night that Cabinet was scheduled for the time that Jimmy Barnes and Suze D'Marchi were playing in the Courtyard. The last time I saw Jimmy Barnes play was at Cold Chisel's Last Stand tour in about 1984 at the Sydney Entertainment Centre. So I was overdue for my Barnesy fix. So I was very annoyed. But look, Ewan Jones makes a good point that we've got to see the arts, we've got to see Australian culture not just as something that is of inherent value, which the arts are. They have value in and of themselves. But that's not inconsistent with recognising that they are also an important part of the creative industries. So we need to look broadly to see what we can do to help them be competitive. So delighted to work with the Small Business Minister, Kelly O'Dwyer. And I just make this point. When the innovation statement was released, some people said to me, why isn't the arts mentioned there? And the answer to that is, well, the innovation statement was the first word, not the last word on innovation. And if you're to be a truly innovative society, you've got to recognise that the arts are at the heart of helping create a culture that is broad thinking, that supports and fosters creativity. That sort of thinking feeds into a culture of innovation.
Just on that, there were tax breaks given last year for some very big American movies that were coming into the Gold Coast, and that is a great thing. Any thought towards doing the same thing for regionally based productions? Locally based? Full disclosure here, I have been involved in one. So.
Okay. Well, that's something that is often raised, is the alignment of domestic supports and those for foreign films. We do have some good supports for the domestic industry. We've got some good supports for foreign ventures as well. And look, that is an area that I'd like to look at as a whole, as part of looking at what we can do to foster a culture of innovation in the arts.
Fairfax.
Thanks for the speech, Minister. Matthew Knott from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. You've talked today about getting rid of outdated media restrictions. Well, a long bugbear in the press gallery has been that photographers can take a photo of you here eating pork belly or at the Australian Open eating an ice cream, but they can't take a photograph in the Senate of anything but people speaking. They can't take a photo of divisions of very important laws being passed, unlike in the House of Representatives. Would you support change to that, and does the government have any plans to amend that? And secondly, we saw another leak from the NBN overnight about the skinny fast technology, which could potentially replace fibre to the node in some areas. Now, fibre to the node has been a big part of the government's plan. Would you support seeing that potentially be replaced if that's what the NBN sees as the best value for the long term?
Sure. Well, to the first point in relation to photography in the Senate chamber, I'm with you, brother. President Mears has lobbied me relentlessly. It's ultimately a matter for the Senate chamber to determine, which means each of the party rooms of the coalition in the Senate and of the opposition form a view. So my voice is just one amongst the colleagues in the Senate party room. But I want the change because I'm sick and tired of the House of Reps getting front page pics of members of the House at historic moments doing interesting things, and there's just not that opportunity for us. So I think purely in the self-interest of senators, that should change. In terms of the NBN, I mentioned in answer to an earlier question, that we very much have taken a technology agnostic approach to the NBN. Rolling out the technology in a particular area that can see the NBN rolled out fastest and cheapest. And as a result, that's why we have fibre to the node, it's why we have HFC, it's why we have fixed wireless, it's why we have satellite, and there's still some fibre to the premises, which was instigated by our predecessors. We think that's the right approach. The alternative is to see the NBN rolled out over a period 6 to 8 years longer and at $30 billion extra cost. So we want it out faster and cheaper. In relation to skinny fibre, there has been a trial of what's known as skinny fibre in a couple of locations. Skinny fibre in those particular areas has resulted in about a 10% reduction in cost of fibre to the premise, so that's about $400 less. It costs about $4,500 per prem for fibre to the premises. Fibre to the node is still about half that price in terms of cost. Now, skinny fibre could reduce the civil works costs in some circumstances. So we're not against skinny fibre. That's why NBN's looking at it. It's not been a secret trial, as has been reported. In fact, it was referred to, I think, by NBN in their half-year results. So secret it is. So skinny fibre could have application, but not just for fibre to the node. Not just for fibre to the prem. It could also have application in parts for HFC and fibre to the node. So we're not averse to doing things that will see lower cost, but for the opposition to pretend that somehow skinny fibre represents their dream of a low-cost fibre to the prem, it's not the case. The approach we're taking is still the best way to roll it out fast and cheaper, but if there's a good role for skinny fibre, hey, we're all for it.
AOP. Sorry, 2SM.
Isabel Musai from 2SM. As Arts Minister, are you concerned by lockout laws in New South Wales and Queensland, given musicians say they're struggling to make money and it could result in live music venues closing?
Thank you. Fortunately, I don't have responsibility for liquor licensing laws, but look, I'm someone who tends towards freedom, who tends towards liberty, so that tends to be my disposition. I do have some sympathy for the musicians.
Keating Media.
Minister, thanks for the speech. Jethro from inside Canberra. You mentioned a couple of times about social media, digital economic, and our transition of our economic. However, in my opinion, they could be actually combined in one huge topic, and I actually think Australia is a little bit behind of it. In fact, our social media and the digital economics actually relies on other countries' applications, Facebook, eBay, and Alibaba. And what is your view about it? And if Liberal is elected in this year, would you and the government is trying to help in this situation to actually have our own social media and digital strategy as a national policy? Thank you.
Yeah, look, I would love for there to be Australian equivalents of Facebook who can grow, who can employ people, that we can use them as consumers. I think that'd be fabulous. No doubt there are many businesses in their early stages who are aspiring to be just that. Just because it hasn't happened on that sort of scale as a Facebook doesn't mean that just around the corner there's not a very bright Australian with an idea, with a good plan, with particularly a funky title for their business. Nothing to say that's not around the corner, and I hope it's the case.
Sarah Martin.
Minister Sarah Martin from The Australian. I wanted to ask you about how your negotiations are going with the crossbench and with Labor on the 2 out of 3 rule. You mentioned that you wanted the reform package passed in its entirety. If you can't get support for the 2 out of 3, why not push ahead with the REACH rule and try your luck with the new Senate for the 2 out of 3 rule?
Well, discussions are going well. Firstly, starting with the opposition, with Jason Clare. As you know, he supports the removal of the REACH rule. He has an open mind when it comes to 2 out of 3, and he would like the benefit of the Senate inquiry process to help inform his and the caucus's views. So I remain an optimist. When you're the manager of government business in the Senate, you've always got to be an optimist, otherwise you go crazy. With the crossbench, in my discussions, they recognise the need for change, and again, they have an open mind and an open disposition when it comes to 2 out of 3. So I'm never one who wants to speak on behalf of crossbenchers or do a tally of their number on their behalf, but look, I mean, really, you know, if we can't, as a parliament, agree that both REACH and 2 out of 3 are redundant, then I just don't think, as a parliament, we're really recognising the world that we live in. So I'm going to plough ahead and endeavour to get rid of both REACH and 2 out of 3 together.
Tony Melville.
Minister Tony Melville, Director of the National Press Club. Mark Scott put up some interesting arguments about the ABC and SBS just here a few weeks ago, and about how they could, you know, basically merging, and some of the issues around the ABC having to compete for sports and having to compete at the same news time with ABC and SBS. Just wondering what your views are on that, and just on the NBN and business. With free trade agreements, we often hear that we have these great free trade agreements, but nobody's making any use of it because they don't understand it or they don't know how to use it. With the NBN, is there sort of a parallel there? Are you looking at how businesses can maybe be helped down the track of making these great leaps that they will get when they get the NBN?
Sure, thank you. On ABC and SBS, I think SBS has a very distinct role. And I think one of the reasons why we have such a good bedrock of tolerance in Australia is because of the work that SBS has done over the years. It's been, I think, a subtle injection of diversity and difference into the community. So I think SBS has an important role to play. That's not to say that there aren't ways that SBS and ABC could cooperate better. I'm sure that they can. But yeah, SBS still has an important role. In terms of NBN, yeah, look, I think you're right. Whenever we talk about NBN, we tend to talk about the means rather than the end, as though the means, the mechanics of the NBN is a thing in and of itself. The NBN only has meaning and purpose insofar as it can be of assistance to business, that it can better connect individuals. That's what we should be focusing on. And you know, one of my criticisms of Stephen Conroy in this portfolio was that he was completely obsessed by the thing itself rather than what it could do. You know, he really took, I think, a theological approach to the NBN. I think there was a whole theology that he developed around the NBN, which, you know, in a sense was all, you know, very charming. But the NBN is all about what it can do for businesses, what it can do for individuals.
Peter Phillips.
Minister Peter Phillips, one of the directors of the National Press Club. It's great to welcome you back here. I think it would be sort of almost remiss of us not to use the opportunity of your presence here, and particularly not to use the opportunity of your being a very, very senior minister, and also you're having yet another hat relating to the management of government business in your chamber. Remiss of us in those circumstances not to ask you whether you might be able to give us some sort of insight into just sort of what's going on, and and very particularly what's likely to be going on or around the 3rd of May or the 10th of May. And in asking that question, I won't put on the public record that I'm sort of struggling a bit at the moment finalising bookings with some of the local hotels with whom we normally have very good relations in relation to planned visits to Canberra by very senior people who have invitations to attend budget night functions. Can you give us some insight?
Sure. Well, one of the reasons why people really don't know what's happening in the Senate is because we're too often neglected. In the Senate, we're treated very much as being off Broadway. It's a little bit different this week. We do at times our best to make the Senate and its processes as medieval as possible to keep people guessing. Well, I guess the simple story of what's happening this week is that we want once and for all to get the Senate reform legislation through the Senate. We would have already achieved that had Labor not filibustered both this week and in the previous sitting week. It also remains a priority for us to have the ABCC legislation debated. Again, that would have already been debated had Labor not kicked it off to a Senate committee, and if Labor had not filibustered earlier the Electoral Matters Bill. So that's where things are at today. In terms of the budget, 10th of May.
So is there any prospect that the ABCC bill could be debated again this week?
The Senate reform legislation, I think, will take all of the regular time this week and also the additional hours that the Senate has agreed to. If I had to hazard a guess, I'd say that the Senate reform legislation would probably come to a vote maybe sometime around 3 a.m. Friday morning. But that's all dependent on our colleagues and how many of them wish to make a contribution. So I'd anticipate that the ABCC bill would be addressed in budget week.
Jackson Goth-Snape.
Minister, back on the media reforms. In South Australia, the regional commercial television stations, if there was a trigger event, would have to meet a local content requirement for the first time. That requirement's about as little as 20 minutes of local news per week. Those stations already provide about 10 minutes per week in partnership with local newspapers, meaning that this requirement is very minimal and would unlikely to produce any more local journalism jobs. Could you comment about those requirements? And there's been some criticisms about those reforms suggesting that really it's only the local members who are going to walk to their TV stations and give them a chance to get their head on TV. Is that the case?
You're cynical. No, I'm sure that's not the case. Local communities really do value the news that's produced locally. They also value the local ads. It gives a sense of community. It reinforces a sense of locality. So I don't think we should underestimate the importance of local news services to the communities that they serve. You're right, part of the package that we're putting forward is that for the first time in major population centres in non-aggregated markets, there will be a baseline requirement of 360 points over a 6-week period. Points are in effect a proxy for minutes of content. That's a requirement that's not presently there. Now, you're right, in some of those non-aggregated major population centres, there are broadcasters who do provide some local content, but there would be nothing to stop that local content being removed. What we're proposing is that after a trigger event, that new baseline would come into place, and that is a protection to ensure that there does remain some local content in those areas, but recognising that there are some broadcasters who already provide local content.
Andrew Tillett.